You're listening to Docs Outside the Box, episode 56, with Dr. Rob Gore, Executive Director of the Kings Against Violence Initiative.
Welcome to Docs Outside the Box podcast. This is your official show, looking inside the minds of cutting-edge and innovative doctors. Think you'll find these stories in any medical textbook? Sorry. You're getting real live insight from men and women pushing the envelope beyond medicine. Ordinary doctors doing extraordinary things. Let's start now with your host, Dr. Nee Darko.
This episode is brought to you by Set for Life Insurance. Protect yourself against life setbacks with Set for Life Insurance. Set for Life Insurance gets you disability and life insurance at a reduced cost with their exclusive discounts. Now that's why I use them. Visit www.setforlifeinsurance.com and tell them Dr. Darko sent you. What's good, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Docs Outside the Box. I am the Doc Outside the Box, Dr. Nee Darko. And I'm mad excited about this next guest. My next guest is Dr. Rob Gore. You have heard about him all over. If you haven't, you are living under a rock. Dr. Rob Gore is an ER physician who works currently at Kings County Hospital. And he is literally changing lives on a daily basis, not only with the practice of emergency medicine, but also with his program, which he's getting numerous accolades for. And the name of his program is called the Kings Against Violence Initiative. And what that is it is a hospital and school-based youth violence intervention, prevention, and empowerment program that targets teenagers that have been either injured as a result of violence or are at high risk for violence or recurrent violent injury. Now, I got a chance to first meet Dr. Rob Gore a little over 10 years ago when I was a medical student. I was doing a sub-internship at Cook County Hospital. He was finishing up his chief year in emergency medicine. I got a chance to interact with him for a couple of weeks. And I'm not going to lie, I was really impressed with him back then. But I had no idea that he would take this huge leap and have such a large effect on his community back in Brooklyn. Now, this episode is for anybody who always wanted to have a really large impact, not only just in society, but more specifically in their community. This is the blueprint for you right here in this interview. He's going to take us through his community, take us through the history of Brooklyn and the effects that it has had on him. He's going to take us through the thought of KAVI and how, in essence, he had so many multiple no's and how he took his experiences in Haiti in a very low resource, low funded area and used that to make KAVI very successful. He's also going to take us through how he handles multiple no's and how you can still create change even though you're getting so many no's. The big thing, too, that I found really interesting that I think you all are really going to learn a lot from is now that you get a program, now that you have a little bit of funding, now that you have a curriculum, how do you convince the students, the teachers, as well as the parents to fall in line? And then we're also going to learn a little bit about how meditation helps him get into that quiet space and able to focus better with KAVI. And as always, with all of my guests, he's also going to answer hashtag I'm not just a doc. Get your paper, get your pen, get your whatever you use to take notes. This is the episode that you're going to want to keep notes on. Without further ado, I present Dr. Robert Gore. Really excited to present to you all a doctor who has actually played a major role in my life in terms of someone who I admire and respect a lot, Dr. Robert Gore. He's on our show. He is the emergency room physician that you have seen all over the place. This gentleman is the founder and executive director of the KAVI program, which is short for Kings Against Violence Initiative. It is a violence intervention, prevention, and youth empowerment program located in Brooklyn, New York, which if you haven't seen it on Facebook, YouTube, then you're living under a rock. You need to get outside the box. This guy, his program is everywhere. Dr. Robert Gore, welcome to Docs Outside the Box.
Oh, thanks again for having me, Nick.
Hey, man, this is a year in the making. I've been trying to get you on the show for a while. You are a very, very busy man. We've had some technical difficulties early on, but nonetheless, you stayed with me. We're here. I can't wait to get all this information from you. I think the audience is going to learn a bunch from you. So welcome again to the show, man.
Oh, thanks again for having me. I apologize for the delay as
Oh,
well.
come on now. Come on, man. You're all over the place, man. I mean, you are obviously working with the KAVI program. You're an ER physician, and then, you're out there also trying to raise money for the program. You're snowboarding. I mean, you are literally the Renaissance man, and I've been following you from afar and through social media, and I've been really impressed. So there's no need to apologize whatsoever, my man. So look, before we get into the nitty gritty of the interview, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, where you grew up, things like that.
So I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and I grew up in pre-gentrified Fort Greene and then Flatbush in the 80s and
Flatbush.
90s. Yeah. For people who aren't familiar, Flatbush is, well, actually, Brooklyn itself is a special place.
It's complex, right?
It's so complex, and most Def called it the planet. Right. And we all, often we all, we refer to it as Planet Brooklyn because if you can think it up, if you think of a person, any specific shape, type, ethnicity, they are here. But because of the dynamics and how the communities are situated, there are all these interesting overlaps and these different blends that are unlike any place on the planet. Plus, it's accessible too.
Oh my goodness, tell me about it. Now, I grew up in Left Rack City in Queens, not too far from Shea Stadium, right near off of the Van Wyck, and those are the projects. You know what I'm saying? But I had family that lived in Brooklyn, and I was scared to go into Brooklyn during those times and stuff, and Brooklyn has changed a lot, some for the better, some for the worse, depending on how you want to look at things. But I did see you were interviewed on the History Channel, and you were talking about growing up in Brooklyn. You made it a point to say pre-gentrified Brooklyn. Why do you talk about that? Why do you feel like that's really important to say?
Well, I think people look at Brooklyn, and people look at, around the world, Brooklyn as this special mecca, and it is. And they see this one facade to it almost as this Shangri-La. And Brooklyn has been home to many people, and its influences in every aspect of what we do, but many newcomers don't know what it was like, and the history of it is so important for how this and we're not even a city, but how the borough has evolved, and I like to make it a point. People, I grew up in downtown Brooklyn and in Flatbush, and downtown Brooklyn, even Brooklyn itself, it was home, but it wasn't really pretty. You had nice trees in the parks periodically, but it didn't have that same element where you've got sidewalk cafes and
Soul Cycle,
and all these businesses thriving, and you got a chance to hang out, and it was you can walk around at any point in time. Don't get me wrong, I do like how it's evolved in the sense that we can still hang out in our borough without feeling like your life is going to be threatened, but it didn't always look like that. And when people who were the reason why we often talk about gentrification and why pre-gentrification was such an important part of Brooklyn itself is because, now many people were displaced, and people move into an environment without really understanding, the importance or the significance of it. And we want to make sure that we don't forget those who were here a long time, because they are essential and an important part of the culture of Brooklyn, and even what makes Brooklyn Brooklyn right now.
That's a really good point. I appreciate you sharing that. So you said you grew up in Fort Greene or near that area. Right. Did you ever run into Spike Lee?
So Spike Lee was my neighbor. He lived two doors down. Yeah. I grew up on Washington
Please,
Park.
baby. Please, baby. But that was my man.
Yeah. So he was a lot older, substantially older than me. But he lived a couple of doors down on Washington Park. His father was still there. Matter of fact, his father still lives over there. And his, that block itself was pretty cool. There were a lot of kids, all of different age ranges, but Mr. Lee used to teach us music. So he taught us about scales and harmonizing, and like we would go into, the downstairs apartment, and he would play on his piano. And so we were exposed to that, and that's just what people did back then, because it was very much a community. People took care of each other's kids, and they invited them into their homes, and they shared their experiences, particularly a lot of the creative arts. I know people talk of that film Brooklyn Boheme, but we lived it in the 80s, and there were artists, there were sculptors, there were tons of musicians on our block. Spike was in the process of becoming a filmmaker. He hadn't made She's Gotta Have It yet, but we remember, Spike is coming in, he's coming on the block, and so we all knew who he was. But everyone tried to share their talents with the other kids on the block, which was pretty dope.
He's one of my favorite directors, actually, man.
Yeah, now you know what? When you break ground, and all you have to do is see somebody that's in that position, and you go, okay, you know what? He's doing it, therefore there's at least hope for me.
Right.
Same thing. We had the same experience with other physicians. I remember I was 16 years old when I realized I wanted to become a doc. I wanted to teach. I wanted to be a change agent. I grew up in a house. My mom.
Let's get into the nitty gritty. Tell us about that. What was you like before you went to med school? Like, how was you in high school? What was Rob Gore like then?
So you've got the junior high school. What I feel like they're different eras. I did well in high school. I graduated valedictorian. But before that, I started off in a conditional program at Brooklyn Tech. Let's go back junior high school. So
you went to Brooklyn Tech, okay?
No, I started at Brooklyn Tech in the summertime, but I went to a place called Philippa Schuyler, which is a gifted and talented middle school that had kids of color, and it was in the heart of Bushwick. And so Black and Latino kids and a handful of Asian kids went to junior high school in Bushwick, and we came from all over the borough. But what was cool about it was it was a special sanctuary where it was a really positive thing for you to do well. Like the popular kids, the kids who did well. And I think when you're in that type of environment where people look like you, the teachers look like you, and everyone around you is invested in your educational well-being, then you know what it's like to have excellence be a part of your DNA, and that's even outside of what goes on in the home environment. That was definitely evident for me. But when you start getting your hormones, and like that age 11, 12, 13, your mind is all over the place. And I remember for some reason, I went from doing really well, and then I had 55s on my report card and 95s, and my mother said,
was you trying to be cool?
No, I don't know. There's some things I just didn't get. I think the focus was difficult. Like, I had a hard time sitting still, but I also remember during some of those times I wasn't as physically active, just because for whatever reason. I played sports as a kid, and then there was a brief moment where I just wasn't as physically active, and I know. That combined with hormones and changing and becoming, being a preteen, really, has an impact on your focus. And she told me that no stupid people in the family. We're not going to start any new traditions. And then my dad threatened to send me to military school. They were really serious about that. And they started getting applications. And so he's like, "Oh, you think you're tough? You think you're not going to do what you're supposed to do? Guess where you're going to be going to school?" And so I had this rapid turnaround, and I said, I don't think I want to. I like fatigues, and I like wearing boots, and I like camo, but I don't really think I want to go to military school. So I started shifting and started doing my work. But I wound up going to Brooklyn Tech in a conditional program and screwed around in that program. Then I begged and pleaded, and I got a chance to go to Catholic high school because my zone school in Flatbush was exceptionally rough. And luckily, we had some resources, so I wound up going to Catholic school. I went to Bishop Lachlan, which is down in
Oh, you went to Bishop Lachlan, okay.
Yeah, so I went to Lachlan, which was such an amazing place for me. The school was smaller, and I got a chance to play sports. And if you acted up, they definitely call home. But at that point, I figured, my folks are, paying money that they don't have to send me to school, and I didn't feel like acting up anymore. But I think running track really got me to be able to sit still because I have ADD, but we didn't call it ADD back then. You just called it, oh, he's just hyper. But I think running track really helped put me in a different helped me focus a lot. So I could sit still for long periods of time. And I went from being all over the place to sitting still for exceptionally long periods of time and reading and retaining the information. And I remember the first time I went into an exam and I was like, oh, shoot, it's like I'm cheating. And I know all the answers and my mind wasn't all over the place. And I started figuring out there was a direct correlation between my physical activity and my ability to focus. And so, I know, I've shared some pictures and you've seen stuff online. I'm pretty physically active, but it really helps channel a lot of the energy so that I can sit still and focus for long periods of time, which are important for the kind of work that we do.
When you went to, which medical school did you go to?
I went to SUNY Buffalo, which was also pretty dope. I was born in Buffalo but raised in Brooklyn, and my mother's side of the family is in Buffalo. My grandparents moved back and forth between Jackson Heights, Queens, and Buffalo. And then when I got to medical school, they were a lot older, and so they just settled up there. Mm-hmm. And getting a chance to build with family during pretty intense and stressful times throughout those 4 years was important. But also having my grandfather's, we were in the kitchen one day, and I had this look on my face, and I don't know if I failed the test or got pimped in the hospital pretty badly. And he said, I know it was tough, but he said, you got to go for me. And I didn't really understand what he was talking about. And my grandfather grew up in Lancaster, South Carolina, and then moved to Buffalo when he was like maybe 10 or 12 or something. And they were sharecroppers in the South, and they had to leave. They fled their land in the middle of the night because they were considered to be indentured servants and owed money. And if they caught you leaving, then you could be lynched. And he didn't have some of those same opportunities. Even when he was in Buffalo, he got a half scholarship to go to Howard, which was his dream school, and got a full scholarship to go to Shaw University. And he never went to college. His family said, we don't even have enough money for bus fare to get you to college, and we needed you to work to help support the family, because this is also the time of the Depression. Right. And so my grandfather didn't go to college. And you look at Jim Crow, you look at segregation, you look at minimal opportunities for men of color and women of color, and you see it's the most frustrating thing to have these ideas and have this insight and to still keep up on current events, understand the world and how it works, but you can't get that shot to go there because you were born on the wrong side of the tracks or with a different level of affluence. And he became an entrepreneur still with limited education, and so he still sent all his kids to college and made sure he did the same thing for his grandkids. But he said, you got to go for me. You realize, he's like, look, I didn't have those same opportunities, and it's always going to be tough. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging, but you got to stay that course, because there's so many other people that are looking just based on your example behind you, and you have no idea. Like when you and I were speaking earlier before the interview officially started, you said I was the first young black physician that you had come in contact with. And I'm like, wow, sometimes you don't realize that kind of impact, or even just seeing somebody that looks like you in that space, that understands where you come from, that took the same trains, that understands your slang and eats the same stuff that you do. And then you go, you know what? They're here. They did this stuff. They come from where I live. All right, it's going to be okay.
So there was, while you're in Brooklyn growing up, obviously, we both know, and everybody knows, pre-gentrified Brooklyn, there was violence there, right? That's not anything shocking. In Atlanta, being on the West End, I did my residency at Morehouse, but I know the West End, there's some violence there. Right. And obviously in Chicago, there's some violence there also.
Right.
And then afterwards, you came and decided to go to Brooklyn, right? Okay, so as an ER physician, graduating, going and training at Chicago at Cook County, you are basically exposed to a bunch of different disease processes. You can handle any type of situation.
Right.
Which means that you can go anywhere. You have the pick of the litter. You can go anywhere you want to go. You can get any type of money that you want to go, or that you want to get. Why did you decide to go back to Brooklyn?
Brooklyn. So Brooklyn is home. My family's here. Like my parents, my dad's still in Flatbush, which is the hospital is in East Flatbush, so that was part of it. But I'd also gotten a scholarship to come back and practice in underserved communities within New York State. And if I was going to come back to New York State to practice in an underserved community, I was definitely going to come back home. There are many of us who get an opportunity to leave and see something different, but we don't always come back. And if you're looking at how communities get a chance, not just change, but evolve, then you need to have people who understand what's going on. And, I remember I was talking to my folks, my plan was to go around the world and see as many things as possible so that I could come back and take those experiences and share those experiences with people that were in the neighborhood. And I spent, when I was a med student, I rotated at Kings County Hospital in the Department of Emergency Medicine. This was shortly after September 11th, so, a very different time. But I remember walking down the hall and say, you know what, I don't think I'm going to do residency here because I need to go out and see something else completely outside. I need to get even more uncomfortable. Brooklyn to a certain extent, because it is home. Where I grew up, there's a level of comfort that's here, but I wanted to get uncomfortable even more and try living in a city that I had never lived in before. And that's one of the reasons why I went to Chicago. And, my goal was to take all these experiences that I learned, from upbringing in Brooklyn, living in Atlanta and have mentorship that took place and understand brotherhood and sisterhood, and seeing what's going on in Buffalo and take those experiences of what it's like to be in a blue collar town that was, had, large pockets of urban poverty and definitely had marginalized communities, and then see what was going on in Chicago with, the violence and the conflict going on there, and then share what's going on in Brooklyn. I wanted to make sure that people saw that it is okay for you to come back. It is okay for you to come back and live in a black neighborhood where you spent a lot of your childhood in without feeling like, oh, wow, you just couldn't afford to live someplace else.
What caused you to create Kings Against Violence Initiative? Why did you even decide to create one? Why did you even think that you, out of anybody, could fix this problem? Talk to us about that.
When I was at Morehouse, me and my friends, we always mentored, even on campus or in the surrounding community in Southwest Atlanta. And it was funny, like a bunch of us, we all talked about creating youth programs, and we talked about what these programs were going to look. We even talked about what a building would look like if we could have it, and what would that look like if we were all together. And then we left Atlanta and then kind of went on a professional school, and some of us went on a residency. And so, it was always something that was in the back of our minds as far as doing something. And when I was at Cook, I did my senior grand rounds was about youth violence. And I remember being in the ER one day, and it was like a cold and rainy day in summertime in Chicago. So there was nothing coming in. And it was like, there was a lot of blunt trauma. So car accidents were coming in, some MVC rollovers coming from the Dan Ryan. But there wasn't any penetrating trauma. And one of my colleagues said, I'm bored and I hope something exciting comes in. And everybody starts to chime in and say, yeah, I hope something exciting comes in. Yeah. And I want to do some procedures, because excitement, meant penetrating trauma. Penetrating trauma meant you're probably going to wind up either intubating a patient, putting in a chest tube, doing a thoracotomy, opening up their chest, or going to the operating room. But, excitement also meant that it was somebody that was going to come in looking like me, either coming from the neighborhood I live in or coming from one of the neighborhoods my relatives lived in. And it like clicked. And it was, I started thinking about, doing less of a Band-Aid approach, which is a lot of the work that not to say that the work that trauma surgeons or ER docs do isn't important with keeping people alive. I mean, a part of it, you got to keep people alive. But I didn't want to just patch people up and not prevent this stuff from happening over and over again. And
in essence, that's what we're doing though, right? I mean, we're fixing them up. You always want to know, like, what's the follow-up? Right. And what I'm doing, am I really having an effect in the community? Yes, this person is back on his feet, but like you're taking it to a whole different level. Like you have studies to show that, like, what if someone gets shot, if a young person gets shot or is in a stabbing, like the chance of them returning back to the ER, within 5 years, what's the percentage? Like 50%?
It's like close to 50%, and that rate
Oh
of
my
being
God.
killed is about close to 20, even more, maybe more than 20%.
Mm-hmm.
And for Black men, we're dying. That's homicide is the number one cause of death for us ages 15 to 34. For Black women, it's the number one cause of death for women ages 15 to 24. Latinos, it's 15 to 34.
Wow.
So you got all these different things that are coming up, and it's like, all right, at what point do you start figuring out, how do we prevent this stuff from coming in the first place? And so I did my senior grand rounds was about youth violence. I had found some articles while we were cleaning out an office, and it was about gun violence and all these gun violence studies from the 90s. And, and then plus that experience I had in the trauma ER, this had to have been like August or July of 2005. And it's like, all right, this is what I'm going to talk about. And my program director, Steve Bowman, told me, he said, you need to present something that means something to you. And he told me to look up, what was that book? Freakonomics.
Yes.
And he said, just read it. It's going to give you some ideas. So I read Freakonomics, and there was the chapter about why do drug dealers live with their mothers. And I was like, wow. And it was, he started talking about drug dealing and gang violence and the economics around that and why people do certain things. And then I really started looking at how do you prevent this stuff from happening in the first place. And so I started lecturing about youth violence, and then I continued to lecture about it and then kept sketching out ideas when I moved back to Brooklyn and said, there's no intervention program here. There's stuff out in Oakland. There's a new program out in Boston, but there was nothing in Brooklyn. And so my goal was to start creating that stuff. And I kept sketching out ideas. And at the time I was one of the assistant residency directors for our Department of Emergency Medicine. And so I was working on a lot of curriculum development work. And, you start thinking, like, how do people think? How do they learn? How do young people learn? How do adult learners learn? And, really started, creating this framework for what evolved into KAVI. And I didn't have as much time. We started talking to elected officials about, funding and resources, and started applying, tried to apply for some grants. And people said, wow, great idea. There's no money. And, that happened over and over again. And we even got in trouble for meeting with some elected officials. But that's a whole nother story. In the summer of 2009, I got frustrated with minority recruitment in our Department of Emergency Medicine. Not that it wasn't diverse, but I wanted to make sure that, we had a way to build relationships with students of color. They were more long-term instead of just trying to work with people as rising fourth-year medical students. And I developed a program called MMSEM, which stands for Minority Medical Student Emergency Medicine. And we call it the MMSEM Summer Fellowship. And MMSEM was created to provide mentorship and create an environment to focus on leadership and development and project and program development.
So this is like the beginnings almost of KAVI, basically.
Right, the beginnings of KAVI. But it was for medical students interested in emergency medicine, and we always took pre-medical students who were interested in emergency medicine. And the first project that the students had to work on, we had like 7 students. They came from all over the country, Ivy League medical schools, historically Black medical schools, public medical schools, and we only had funding for 2 of those students. And some commuted from way out in Long Island, had never been in New York State before. They commuted from New Jersey, but happened to live in D.C. and were from Nebraska. So people came from all over, and they were putting 60 to 80 hours a week on these different projects. And I was like, wow, I think we're onto something with this kind of environment that was being developed. We only had funding for 2 of them. And these students did this program pro bono, but 3 of the students in the program were tasked with helping develop a violence intervention program. I had stacks of notes and pads and sticky notes and project presentations about what a best practices approach would look like. And I said, you all going to help me create this program. And I hadn't had research students or any interns. And so these young women, Adrienne Stevenson, Sarah Jameson, and Michelle Garrido, came up with the name KAVI.
Wow.
Yeah. One is family practice. Michelle's family medicine. Adrienne wound up becoming an OBGYN. She's in D.C. and Sarah's an emergency medicine doc in New York City. And they came up with the name KAVI and, created our first official presentation with all these best practices looking like a program. And it was like, oh, I think we're onto something. But I think, we all try to do this stuff as on a solo effort or with like one other person, and you need that team dynamic. And so when we started working with them and they came up with a simple thing, just like a name, it gave it a real body. And it's like, okay, we have something now. And then we started applying for grants over and over and over and over again, but kept being turned down, saying, great idea, no money, no money, no money. Now, around the same time, I'd gotten into doing some work in Haiti. And so we just kept doing that. We started doing, large scale trainings with, training lay people and medical professionals in first aid and emergency response. We were training drivers and laborers in first aid and emergency response, and then even developed a training program. And, with this very, very super, super small budget, but we were learning how to build capacity and learn how to integrate within the community. And so I came, coming back to Brooklyn, I'm like, wait a second, we've been doing
the
this
light
stuff
bulb went off.
Light bulb comes off, and we've been doing this stuff in Haiti.
Why can't you succeed in Brooklyn?
I was like, why can't we succeed in Brooklyn? And then in the summer of 2011, after being turned away for grant after grant, I said, you know what? I said, fuck this. We're going to launch this program independent of finances. We're going to start this program. We're going to scale back. We're not going to focus on hospital-based intervention right now. We're going to take this program to the schools because the schools already have one big things I learned in Haiti is that if you already have a pre-existing infrastructure, it doesn't have to be perfect, but that's a central point where you can start. And you already have a cohort of people that are there. We're going to build it using interns. I know I can convince my friends to do some stuff, but we're going to focus in the school that's across the street from the hospital, and we're going to build it from there because you already have kids there. And it also shifted our focus instead of doing the intervention with people who've been shot and stabbed, which was like a big part of what we were trying to do, and said we're going to prevent this stuff from happening in the first place. And that's why we started taking it to the schools, and we started building it within the school with 4 kids who were, recommended to us by one of the school principals and school social workers for, being kids who, they had some troubles with. And by the end of the year, we had 50 plus kids programming 5 days a week, a hospital and a school program, and all doing this with no money. I was paying out of my pockets, and I recruited my friends.
I remember you said you were buying pizzas out of your own. You were paying for food, everything.
Yeah, buying pizza. Buying.
Brooklyn pizza is the bomb, though. So
Brooklyn pizza is the bomb, and it's cheap and it's good. But it's we've always people have traditionally shared ideas and engaged in meaningful discussions and dialogue over food, and you got to get people there. That's one thing. So that's what we started doing, and had incorporated my medical students. We incorporated the resident physicians who were working with us, who were at Kings County and SUNY Downstate, and even resident physicians who were, one of my mentees that I met just like I met you, a sister named she's Dr. Darima Jenkins. I forgot her new last name, Dr. Darima Hughes. She's an emergency physician in Atlanta. I met her when she was a medical student. And she came to do an elective with me during residency and I said, Darima, can you create our girls program? I want to do this properly. I don't want to just, do this thing haphazardly, and let's start doing focus groups. And so she developed a template along with another person, Sharina Sutar. They created our girls program. And so we just started building in, all these different people, from social worker graduate students, ER social workers, friends, family, colleagues, students, everybody started coming together to make this stuff happen.
Well, let me ask you a question. Let's take it back to that first day where
Yep.
you have 4 students right in front of you and they're probably looking up like, what are we here for?
Mhm.
Like, what was that experience like? Tell us about, like, we want to be a fly on the wall during that first experience where you have a curricula, you have 4 students who are here and they're KAVI. What's KAVI? Like, what am I here
Right.
for?
So it's, they definitely started looking at us like, why are we here in this room? And I think it's, we first started asking them, we weren't, we told them what our goal was, and they were kind of like, okay. And the first questions that we had, and I told them my story, why was I there? And then I wanted to hear, who they were. And when you got a kid who's considered to be a knucklehead kid, and we were all knucklehead kids, the kid who's disruptive in class, the kid who's shouting stuff out, the kid who can't sit still, the kid who's falling asleep in class because they had a sugar rush, and now that all of a sudden that sugar rush died out, and they don't have any, they have nothing left in their tank, and so they're sleeping in the back of the class. Or that person who's stressed out and has got a lot on their mind, and sleep is the only way that they can kind of feel calm. We've all been those students. And, when we started talking to them, because now they didn't have this massive, audience in the classroom with like all their other classmates, but there was only a few of them, we wanted to find out who they were. And once we started talking about who they were and what they did and what was important to them and, what their communities were like and, why they even were sent to work with us, I think they were like, okay, all right, I'll listen to you. And you brought me some food, so I'm okay. And it definitely smelled a lot better than the free. And then like anything else, when you're working with young people, you've got to be consistent. And
Right. That's what I was going to ask you. So how did they all
keep
come
going.
back? Did they all come back? Like, is it like a weekly program at this point, or?
At this point, we're doing stuff weekly, and
Okay.
we still got to get the kids and get them from down the hall, and they're running around the hall, and some of them like, oh man, I don't want to go, but we pulled them out of class, and so if we pull you out of class, that means you miss your class, and you don't, especially if you were cutting it or trying to get out of it anyway. And so that was a little bit of incentive to get people to class. It's like, all right, we got pizza, and we get out of class. Okay, I'll come. I might not want to sit there, and I'm not ready to talk about stuff just yet, but at least you keep them coming. And then the next thing, we kept coming back, and then showing up on days that they didn't have school, and so they start getting used to seeing you, and you realize they go, oh, this wasn't just a fly by night thing. And I'm starting to see you. I remember this one dude had his pants like way down, and he saw, this was like after week number 3. I'm just walking down the hall, and he said, "Oh, hey, doc," and then he just like pulled up his pants and stopped running, and I was like, "Oh, I think they're developing this
Respect you.
respect for us." And I didn't even say anything. Like when your mother shoots you that look, or your father looks at you, your grandfather, and once you see that look, you're not supposed to do anything. You're supposed to just stop in your tracks. That happened, and it was like we got them. I was like, they bought into what us just being there consistently. And then they said, you know what, they could never remember the name KAVI. That took like a whole year and change, like about a year for it to finally set in after reminding them every day, every time we saw them. But they would ask, they said, Dr. Gore, can my friend come to the group? And it was like, oh, okay. So now they want to bring their friends, and you're dealing with peers. You're dealing with teenagers who, peer behavior and peer interactions are exceptionally important. And so then the kids started recommending other kids to come to us because they felt like it was a safe space, and we got free food. There's a lot better than the free. But, going there and showing up every day and then going to talk to their teachers about them and speaking about them in a positive fashion, were ways that we started really building relationships with them. Something, everybody, not even just a kid, we all need an advocate on our behalf. And I remember, a student might have gotten in trouble or something, or, was about to get reprimanded for something. And then, we went up to the teacher and started talking about how pleasant he was in the group and what he was learning and some of the things that he had been doing. And I think they realized, wow, this is somebody that's also on my side. And then we started calling the parents too. And, the parents at first were like, why is he in this group? What did he do? What did he do today? Say, you do some stuff up at the school. It's like, no, he's in our program. We're a violence intervention program, but we're also focusing a lot on leadership and development. Dude, I'm a doc from at Kings County and downstate, and this is what's important for us. And we want to make sure that they succeed and that they do well, not even just staying out of trouble. And when you talk to a parent or a guardian, or even a teacher for that matter, as far as what it is that we want to do, and you're focusing on improving safety and increasing mentorship and providing advocates and creating a support system in addition to what already exists at the school, then the teachers and the other people in the school feel like we have an ally.
Now, obviously the program has been widely successful. How about the negatives? Have you ever encountered a child, a kid, anybody who you've just looked back and you're like, man, I wish I could have done more to reach them, or someone that you just felt like you couldn't, no matter what you did, you couldn't reach them?
Right. There are a couple of kids that we've worked with who, have gone to jail and are currently incarcerated. There was one kid that a couple of kids we worked with that first year that were super intelligent, and, in and out of trouble, but they needed so much support, and we didn't have the resources at that time. But I remember there was one young man who had been in juvie before, and he was at one of the high schools on the campus that we were working in, and doing well with us. We created, like, he was like a kind of an OG at age 15, but started doing well, and we started really building relationships with them. We started getting them books and really focusing on where they wanted to be, not where we wanted them to be, but where do they actually want to be, and see how we could help and support them. And we started seeing the changes in his behavior. I remember he and another kid who would have normally, when they came in contact, they would have normally started fighting. But something happened. They calmed each other down because somebody said something to one of the kids, and one of the guys said, chill, you don't do that. And the teacher was like flabbergasted that this one kid said chill out to the other kid, and the other kid was like, all right, cool. And they were like, how do you all know each other? And they were like, nah, we're in the program together. They were calling KAVI the program. And you start seeing how people who could have been considered enemies because of aggressiveness, or maybe come from different gangs, all of a sudden, because they're in a safe space, they've developed a friendship and a level of respect. And because of that, we try to emphasize, how do you create mutual respect, no matter whether you're in the space and outside of the space. And when you start seeing young people applying those principles, then all of a sudden they come in. But I remember that one kid, he was starting to do really well, and then one day we came up to the school to go meet with them, and we saw the sheriffs taking him away. And man, I don't know what happened. I'm not sure if this was something that happened before, but I never saw him again. I think I called once, but trying to get in touch with somebody who's in juvie, and then he, I think, moved from place to place while he was at the center. When the sheriffs come to pick up somebody who's 15 years old, that's got to be something that's pretty real. And so I lost touch with him and didn't know how to get in touch with him at the time. And so I always wonder what happened to him and some other guys who, also had gone to jail. They were part of our first groups, and really wishing that we could have provided a lot more social support for them. And then we were, that was also a turning point for me and some of our team. It was like, we got to get some resources. The volunteer thing is great because it brought us together and it gave us a foundation, but this can't be the only thing that we're doing.
You're executive director of KAVI. You're also an activist. It's very clear, obviously, that you play a very strong role in your community. How are you able to balance all of this stuff? And then my next follow-up question after that is, like, take us through your day. Like, what's a normal day of you being an ER doc and then trying to work with KAVI, like, and then also being how do you able to balance all of this stuff?
Oh, I think part of me feels like I'm just completely crazy and I don't know any better. And so when you don't know any better, you go, okay. But no, I am physically active, and that helps decompress and helps me get off stress, but it also helps me learn how to channel energy a lot more efficiently. I do martial arts. I do Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And even when I was in residency, I did capoeira and then capoeira Angola. So I've always done and boxing and stuff. So I've always done things that were physically active because I needed either first it was about getting out aggression because I'd be so pissed off I needed to hit something sometimes. And then it became more of like, how do I learn how to channel this energy instead of learning how to get off aggression?
Okay.
That the physical activity is important. I meditate probably 30 minutes to an hour every day. Most of the time, I'm usually laying down and doing deep breathing exercises, and probably 70% of the time, I fall asleep during the meditations, at least by the end. But you have to learn how to quiet your mind just to kind of focus on what things are going on. And, meditation is, it allows you to become this watcher. And instead of assuming, I need to meditate to clear my head, you ain't gonna clear your head, but you can slow things up so you can start to see what's bothering you, both the
Right.
things that you're conscious about and the things that lie in your subconscious. But allows you to kind of get to that quiet space so that you can really figure out what do I need to do next, and so that you're not hindered by things that have taken place in the past. Like we all got problems, but how do you fix it? You know.
So, Rob, what's your advice for young physicians who are listening to this podcast? They want to have an impact in their communities, just like you are having it. Actually, you're having a very large impact in your community. What's your advice for them who are looking to do something similar in their own
So
community?
for young folks and older people looking to do something similar, first figure out what are the problems that you want to solve. A lot of us want to help, but we're not even sure what we're interested in or where our expertise lies. And so figure out what problems do you want to solve, and figure out how do you want to help. Don't just say, "Oh, I just want to help with everything." Think about the things that you're interested in and the things that you like doing, and have some skill sets at. Number two is, you know, um, no one invests in theoretical problems, and I say that is because you know I think we have these great ideas, and there are a lot of great ideas. A lot of them don't happen because people are waiting on somebody else to do them. There are different types. When we launched KAVI, and even doing the work in Haiti, we're trying to think, oh, we need to have money, 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 money to do this. But there are all sorts of different types of resources. You've got social capital, which can be translated, and it can be a particular resource that you can use to start whatever project that you're trying to do, and that can go a long way. You can use interns, you can use friends. It's not the end all be all, but you have to start someplace, and it might even require you scaling back on what your original project or program is, or business, and then over time, having it grow. But nobody's going to invest in anything that you're doing unless they see that you've started something first, because they want to see if you have something that a lot of business people call sweat equity. And if you have invested your time, your money, and your resources, it makes a lot of other people who are coming on say, you know what, I'll invest in them too, because I know they're not going to squander the money or the resources that I'm providing them, compared to you haven't done anything. And, if something doesn't work and I just give you some money, I don't know how you're going to respond to it. But if you're personally vested in it, then they go, okay, you've already got something that's at stake. Another thing is be fluid in your approach. We can be so dogmatic and opinionated and obsessive about how things need to look that we get caught up within our own ideas, and nothing ever translates because we have this fixed way of doing things. And it might be a better way, but given your set of resources right now and what's available, you might have to change your approach. And so you've got to be very fluid in what it is that you're doing and kind of adapt to change. Another key thing is you got to write things down.
That's a good
I
one.
have sticky notes. I have sticky pads all over the place. I have note cards in my, in my car, like old index cards. You got your phone. So there's so many modalities that you can use to write things down. Even in my office, I have a blackboard paint wall that I sketch stuff out. If I want to see things like a really big picture, I got cardboard, um, pieces of cardboard that I have sticky notes and ideas that are organized. You got to write this stuff out. And if you don't write it out, it's going to live in your head. And there are too many great ideas that are stuck in people's heads. And we need to get into the habit of learning how to, not just brainstorm, but start to execute and create prototypes for what things are that we're trying to create. This is a process. You're not going to have great days all the time. It's not something that, particularly if this is something that you're passionate about, you got to stay this course. But last but not least, you got to build a team. That team is so important. And when you look at the dynamics of the team, they don't have to be just like you. Matter of fact, I don't really want a team full of, people who don't sleep that have ADD, because that means this stuff is not going to be so neat. Things aren't going to happen when you want it to happen. But you want people that are going to share that same vision that you have for what it is that you're working on. It's okay to be, have a different approach, but they've got to share that vision. And you want people that are going to have experiences and expertise that are going to be complementary to what it is that you're doing.
So, Rob, we're getting towards the end of the interview. I have a little session that I call just kind of quick, fast questions, where I just ask you any type of question, whatever's the the quickest thing that comes off of your dome piece, just answer it that way. No need to think too much about it. All right. So what's one thing you want listeners to get from this podcast?
I want them to be able to experiment, and I want them to go out and be these change agents that they've talked about. I want them to kind of get out of their heads and move from ideas to action and implementation. You don't have to be a physician. You don't have to go to medical school. You don't even have to be in healthcare, but, being complacent is something that can't continue.
Love it. Love it. So who's your favorite hip hop
artist?
Wow.
There's a lot. It depends on the mood, but, if I had to say one, I like Nas. Yeah.
Nas, yeah, he's nice.
Yeah,
he's
I love his storytelling.
We need a Stillmatic part 2, or I don't know what else you would call it. It was Illmatic and Stillmatic. We need something similar to Five Mics. That version, Nas. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I feel you on that. I quote Nas in some of my talks and stuff, but I like how he's evolved as an artist from this kid from Queensbridge to this entrepreneur and venture capitalist, and really becoming this person who's got a capacity to initiate change and stuff, and is putting his money where his mouth is. When your art and your approach to life remains the same way it was 20 years ago, you can tell that there hasn't been any growth, and we've seen that growth with Nas, and so he'll be one of my favorites just because of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Love the answer. What's a life hack that you use for productivity?
Oh, life hack? There's a t-shirt I had in college that said lead, follow, or get out of my way. And, you have all these sayings and these slogans, particularly when things get rough and you start feeling stagnant. And it's like you start thinking about all those things that used to inspire you when you didn't really have anything. And then I have a theme music playlist that I have.
All right, let's hear it.
So my theme music playlist, is like almost like superhero, superhuman kind of music and stuff that's just that's supposed to kind of get me amped up. There's a lot of Dead Prez. As a matter of fact, I gotta give a shout out to Dead Prez, because I remember when Let's Get Free first dropped. I was a first year med student. And, I had just come up from Atlanta, and I had heard about them before, and then they dropped that album, and it maintained a level of consciousness to what I was doing. And, I would listen to it every day over and over and over again, while I was driving to school. And it made a lot of this stuff, it made me try to stay that course. For why was I there? And you're talking about freedom, you're talking about let's get free. and it's bigger than hip hop, it's like, okay, it's bigger than just being in school. And so it was like a constant reminder. But that theme music playlist, it does have It's Bigger Than Hip Hop on there. I got a lot of Kendrick Lamar, mainly like from the second album, on there. I got this cat named Blue, Blue, who's from LA. Is some tracks that I feel is like almost like Superman music.
BLU.
Yeah, BLU. I'm actually pulling up my list right now. I have this one. I like Wale too, and there's this one track. It was him, Meek Mill, and Rick Ross, and it's called Ambition. And so, like when I listen to it, like I get in that zone. It's like, all right, I'm really creating some stuff. And then, I'm not gonna lie. Living in Atlanta, you get used to all sorts of musical genres, and I got some Too Short on there. Blow the Whistle. That's just like a theme song. Like when we go snowboarding, they always play it at the National Brotherhood of Skiers, and so it's like one of those feel good kind of tracks. And I got a bunch of Mos Def in there. I got a lot of Kanye stuff, the old Kanye stuff.
You're gonna have to find a way to curate this for us all, so that we can kind of see what you're doing.
I got some stuff on my Spotify list too that it gets me in that zone. But I got about 200 things because how you are at 8 o'clock in the morning may be very different from what you need and how you are at 11 p.m. or 3 o'clock in the morning. And as trauma surgeons, as ER docs, we're up at all different times of the day, and you need that extra oomph depending on the time of the day. You don't need to be super animated, like you need to just break out of brick walls, but you need to get something that's going to put you in that special zone.
I love it. Well, look, I want you to finish this sentence for us. It's, I'm not just a doc. I'm
not just a doc. I am a change agent.
Love it. Haven't heard that answer before. That's an amazing answer. Dr. Robert Gore, I want to say thank you very much for being on the show. But I want to take a real quick moment to acknowledge you for what you're doing. Medicine and taking care of patients, that's a noble thing to the outside world. But for you, me, people who are in the trenches, ER physicians, trauma surgeons, OB, people who, day in and day out are making life and death decisions within minutes, it can be really stressful. It can be really stressful. It can be mentally taxing. And at times, it's really hard to not take things home with you. And I think that we've all developed a way to deal with this on a day-to-day. And most of us have this wall, that we've kind of set up so that, we don't take our work home with us. If a patient dies, you kind of live with it for a little bit and then you kind of move on. But, we do it. We kind of make our way through it. But for you, you didn't do that, whether it's in Atlanta, Chicago, and now back home in Brooklyn, you fully embraced the community. You fully decided to tackle, one of the root causes of pain and suffering in your own community, which is violence and interpersonal relationships in a grassroots type of way. Mm-hmm. So I've always admired you since I first met you at Cook County Hospital when I was a third year, fourth year med student doing a sub-I. I was amazed by what you were doing back then. I've been amazed watching you kind of go through your arc. And, there's a bunch of young physicians out there who look up to you. And I just want to say thank you very much for being on Docs Outside the Box. Thank you very much for what you're doing in your community with KAVI. I can't wait to see what's going to happen in 5-10 years.
Oh, word. Much appreciated, brother. I love what you're doing. I like how you've been creating this space and this platform that really didn't exist for physicians. Nobody thinks about us in this capacity, and so it's time to really start showing people. But we've got a long line of physician activists from Che Guevara to Frantz Fanon. Stephen Biko was a medical student when he was doing all the work in South Africa around the Black consciousness movement. So medical professionals, particularly medical professionals of color, have been doing this work, but for some reason, we've kind of forgotten this stuff. So now it's a chance for us to kind of reignite that and inspire this next generation.
Dope interview. I learned a ton. from Dr. Rob Gore. I hope you all learned a lot also. Literally a walking laboratory, a walking encyclopedia of how to start a program with very low resources and how to have a very large impact on your own community. If you want to learn more about KAVI, Kings Against Violence Initiative, please check out the website. It's kavibrooklyn.org. KAVI is KAVI, the word brooklyn.org. You can also find them on Instagram, KAVI Brooklyn, as well as Twitter under the same name. Make sure you leave feedback below. Make sure you subscribe, as well as leave a review on this episode. But I'm going to catch you guys on the next one. Before I jet, though, remember one thing. We only got one life. Let's make it count and live outside the box. Peace.